Okay, so this is my Milestone demo for the GameEngine class and the graphics system with OpenGL. So I'll run this now. So I was able to completely remove the SB7 files, which is nice. And then I'll just discuss first the camera system. So I have a camera manager right now. And this is one that I'm calling a first person. So basically you can kind of like look up, downward angles, basically like you're turning your head and looking around you. And you know, you can move around left, right, up, down, so you can kind of fly through these objects. And also have sort of a, you know, if you needed a crane up and down. And so if I point this first person camera over here, I also implemented where you can switch to, if you add various cameras, you can switch to another one. And so this one I actually have as a third person camera where it's orbiting around a specific object. And I actually have it where I can still, like the target moves with it when I actually move the position. So it's not technically a true third person camera where it's locked on a specific model. And I just left that for purposes so I can, you know, still zoom around this model and, you know, fly around this space if I need to. But basically if I position it right, it'll still target and orbit that specific position. Again, versus the other camera, which is the first person camera where it's sort of free. So if I turn, it's turning the, you know, turning the head of the camera if it was a person rather than orbiting the actual model. So to discuss the models, I believe there's 4 different models, which is a pyramid, a diamond, then there's a cube, and then a raised triangle. And these triforces are basically just made up of 3 of those, but realistically the actual model itself is just one of those triangles. And then so I just elongated some of the cubes and made these rectangles, and then again another pyramid with a texture. So another thing to discuss would be the various types of graphics objects and shaders. So each of these objects has a specific graphics object, which is indicates a specific shader. So as you see here, this pyramid just has a simple flat texture, which is the duckweed. So there's no lighting being implemented on this. And this one was obviously that sort of stock default spinny cube multicolored shader where it was basically taking a point or a color at each vertex and blending them together. For this brick rectangle, basically it has a texture and a point light, so you can see sort of the shading, and you can specify the shading color. These triforces just have a flat color with a point light. And we have the wireframe, which was an interesting other little fun thing that I was playing with, where you can actually turn on just, rather than having them be wireframe lines, you can have them be the actual vertexes. So it's like, just looks like a bunch of spinning points, which was a cool little effect. I don't know where that would come in handy, but that was fun. I got the blend Fong reflection shader finally working on these diamonds, and you can see the point light up above. And then this is just the flat color, so obviously you can't really see any shadows or anything, so they all just blend together. So in terms of the models themselves, they are all being basically I was able to push up the 2 methods that sort of write these out to a file and read these to a file into the base model class, because it was just basically repetitive code. So once I would create the model, I would just call the write to file and then specify, you know, for a diamond shape it would write to the diamond Azul, or the cube when it wrote out to the cube Azul. But basically when I read them in, they just call the base model class, and it would just say read from file, and you know, the base model class doesn't care what shape they are, just it knows, you know, when you create the object you specify the file name. So that's how those are created. And so some things that I still need to implement, I still need to implement the input debouncer, because right now I only have the 2 cameras. So if I add, I'm able to add as many as I want, but because the input debouncer is not implemented yet, it will just kind of spin through all the different cameras where, you know, if you have two, it's a clean back and forth. Because if I had, you know, a third one, basically it would just spin past, it would keep reading the different key presses and go right past the second one and just go all the way to the end. So that was annoying. And I also need to deal with the mouse integration because currently it's just all from the keyboard. So I created the sort of the mouse class, but I actually did not implement it. It was not pretty when I was working on it. So I decided to just stick with the keyboard for now. The other thing I can discuss with these cameras is sort of the different movement. I want to create sort of the follow me camera that we discussed, which really goes back to this third person one where you can actually specify an object, and it would, rather than shifting the camera over like this, it would basically just snap to another object if you specified, to point at that specific object. Currently, I am not using my memory system. It is imported and available, but I was having a hard time figuring out how to figure out all of the heaps. So that is something I want to also look over break on. So I just implemented the align 16 with the matrix class and the camera. And then that was the other thing, was I wanted to get independent shape movement. So basically right now the objects are moving based on their game object class. So the diamonds all move the same, the cubes are all moving the same, and the pyramids are all moving the same. So it's not really differentiated between each object itself. So that is something else I want to look at. And yeah, that is it.